And thanks for coming. Thanks for inviting me. I'm really glad to be here. It feels great to be here and around a bunch of wonderful, like-minded folks. So basically, yeah, my previous work is looking at sort of why we ended up with a system that relies on garbage. It's a sort of materialist analysis of garbage as a way, it's a way of looking at how capitalism works. And when I was going on tour with the book, everywhere I went to all around the US, I went to Canada, I went to the UK, and without fail, everywhere I went, at least one person in the audience said, yeah, but if we just buy the right stuff, if we all eat organic food and drive hybrid cars, everything's going to be okay, right? And so Green Gone Wrong is my response to that. Thank you. That's really encouraging. Jason. Actually, that's palm oil. So what I'm going to talk, oil palm. So what the new book is about is looking at, it's very broad, and it's looking at different aspects of the sort of consumer-based solutions to environmental crisis, to global warming. Looking at these consumer-based solutions and interrogating them. What does it mean when we actually do this stuff? What does it mean, what are the sort of unintended consequences, of which there are unintended consequences, and then where is it just being glossed over? And it's not unintended. It's a deliberate attempt to obscure the effects of ongoing mass production and consumption, reliance on an economy based on growth and wasting. And so that's the sort of gist of it. And I'm looking at sort of three areas: food, shelter, transportation. Within the transportation part of the book, I look at green automobiles, biofuels, and carbon offsetting. And I'm going to talk about biofuels today. So this is, and I have a little bit of a sore throat, so bear with me on that. So I went to Indonesia to research biofuel production and its effects on the rainforest in Borneo. And how many of you have heard about this? Right. So, most Americans are relatively familiar with the effects of ethanol, right? The corn-based ethanol, especially in this part of the country. And because we rely more on gasoline than on diesel, the ethanol has gotten more play and criticism in the US. Biodiesel is, so ethanol's alcohol-based, biodiesel is oil-based fuel. Biodiesel is about over 50% of the vehicles in Europe run on diesel. So it's kind of much more of an issue there right now. But increasingly, biodiesel is being looked at as another component of making renewable liquid transportation fuels. And part of why that's important to keep us on the liquid diet is that you can maintain the kind of production infrastructure that we have, making automobiles and not relying as much on mass transit. So it sort of leaves the current system as undisturbed as possible. So this is the fruit. It's a little dark. This is the fruit of the oil palm tree. So you have an oil palm tree, and from it you make palm oil. This is the fruit. They're just these berries that are like, the size of dates. And this is a plantation that's owned by a company called Wilmar, which I'm going to talk a little bit more. Well, it's sort of threaded throughout the talk. Wilmar is partially owned by Archer Daniels Midland, and Archer Daniels Midland is increasingly moving into the Asian market. And so this is workers taking the harvest of the oil palm and so that it can go be processed in the mill. And that's an oil palm tree, just so you get a sense of what it looks like. And these are my pictures, so they're not professional. But so it's like I went on this trip and I'm giving you guys a slideshow of my trip, which is really what this is all about. I just want to give slideshows of my trip. So, yeah, so this is a village called Pare, and it's in the middle of Borneo. It's, you know, like crazy 7-hour car ride through like, you know, weird roads that are partly paved and partly not, and like a 2-hour boat ride up this river and the Kumba River. And so in this village, there's about 60 houses, and what's happening there is it's the people that live there are part of this. They're indigenous people to Borneo, and there's a number of different groups, and they're sort of collectively referred to as the Dayak. So this is a Dayak village, and they're hunter-gatherers. They rely on the forest for their livelihood. They cultivate crops within the forest, so they practice agroforestry, very complicated system that requires a lot of knowledge about how to incorporate cultivation into the maintenance of forest keeping. And so they constantly rotate. They don't deplete the land. They use it for a couple years, and then they move to a different plot and let it go fallow for like 15 years, you know, at least. So they've lived like this for centuries without destroying the forest. What started happening in 2005 is an oil palm plantation began moving into their ancestral land without consulting with them. They found a chainsaw crew just clearing forest without, you know, they were out hunting, and they happened upon this chainsaw crew. Within 2 years, they had cleared this company, Peat Lestari is what it's called. They had cleared 15,000 acres of this forest that these people have been relying on. And so in 2007, I'm just going to show you the village a little bit. That's the pathway up to the village. This is what, you know, so it's very, I mean, it's not, you know, they really rely on the forest. I mean, that is their main. And so the woman there is drying rice. So they have rice fields within the forest. They grow pumpkin. They have rubber trees that they've planted, so to earn extra income. So it's subsistence, and then also, you know, they sell, and sometimes they'll sell the wild boar that they hunt for money. And this is the house of the head of the village, and his name is Momonus, and his wife is Margareta, and they hosted me while I was there. And you know, a bunch of village men came and they told me this story. So basically, in 2007, 2 years later, after they found this initial clearing, they found another. Okay, so in between 2005 and 2007, they started filing complaints with the local officials and kind of going through the formal channels, and never got any response. They also went to you know, they took it to the federal level. And part of why they were able to do this was because Friends of the Earth Indonesia, which is called Walhi, went in. They do sort of outreach in the forest, and they find these villages where, you know, where this type of thing is happening, and they help them get, you know, sort of get organized and help them figure out what they needed to do. So they went through the formal channels, nothing. 2007, they found another chainsaw crew, and at one point, it was unclear. At one point, they found a chainsaw crew and a bulldozer, and they were totally fed up with trying to go through the official channels, so they seized the bulldozer and the chainsaws. And the Momonus and this other guy, Jamaluddin, I asked them, had you ever done anything like that before? And they were like, no. And Momonus and Jamaluddin were put in jail for it. And they said that the cops tricked them out of the bulldozer, giving them bulldozer back. But so in 2000, I was there in 2008. I was there about a year ago. And by then, they had gotten their hands on a map that PTLL had made. PTLL is owned by a company called Duta Palma, which sells to Wilmar. So this is sort of the connection. And it's this kind of network that makes it complicated to trace everything. So they found a map that said that PTLL planned to enlarge its plantation to 50,000 acres. And on the map that they found, Pare was gone, and its sister village, Semenying, was also gone. So it was sort of like they're looking at their fate, you know? And basically, you know, they're telling me this, they tell me this whole story. And the next day, we get up and they said, you know, we had this meeting the night that I got there, and which went until like 4 in the morning. And one of the guys in the meeting, this guy Julian, says, has anybody been out to the edge of the forest where the clearing was most recently? They had found some more clearing, and one guy said, yeah, I've been out there and nothing's happening. So the next morning, we get up, and Momonu says, and Julian's there, and they say, do you want to go out and see it? And of course I did. And so we drove out to the edge of the forest. And oh yeah, this is just to give you a sense of what, I mean, these people are really poor, and there's no furniture. These are like tablecloths, plastic tablecloths that they spread out on the floor. And this is a bedroom. So, I mean, you know, they've pasted newspaper over the walls to sort of, for insulation. It doesn't get that hot, I mean, that cold there, of course. It's tropical. This is very blurry, but this is a story which was actually pasted to the wall in the room where I stayed, and it's about how village girls are being taken by the plantation workers on the palm oil estates and being used as sex slaves and being forced to work. Okay, so those guys take me out to the edge of the forest, and this is it. So you can see on the left is the forest, the rainforest still standing, and on the right is PTLL's work. And they are clearing, they're clear cutting, and they're burning. And burning forest is illegal under Indonesian environmental protection laws, and they're doing it anyway. And also, you're supposed to do environmental impact reports and all this stuff, and they're not doing any of that. And they're colluding with local officials, you know, the sort of, you know, this standard story that we've all heard a million times, you know, that's what's facilitating this. And partly also what facilitates it is after the Suharto regime fell in '98, there was this idea that power needed to be devolved and decentralized, because that was one of the things that allowed for the dictatorship to happen. So all of these local officials who'd been starved of power for decades suddenly are now, you know, cutting deals with palm oil plantations. You know, they're on the take, and they have, you know, they have access to resources and power that they never had before. So that's kind of spurring this on too. Just to give you more of a sense of what, I mean, it's incredible. Like, as far as you could see, you know, was this clear cutting, and then just at the top edge, those are palm oil trees. So it's like this you know, emerald green, like, army approaching. Okay, before I go there, I'm just going to tell you a few statistics just to sort of put it in perspective. So biodiesel does emit less carbon dioxide than petroleum, about less than a quarter when you burn it in an engine. But according to some estimates, I mean, there was a couple studies that were published in Science magazine, the journal Science, at the beginning of 2008 that said that when you account for the whole process, it actually produces more CO2 than just burning fossil fuels. And according to Food First, palm oil can generate as much as 10 times more CO2 than petroleum. So what this what this has led to, the deforestation in Indonesia has led to that country, which is an undeveloped, it's an undeveloped, mostly and non-industrialized country. It is now the world's third largest emitter of carbon dioxide, following China and the US. And that's from deforestation and burning, like what's happening here. So currently, there's 16 million acres in Indonesia dedicated to palm oil production, and the national target is to get that up to 26 million acres by 2015. So in the development plan of the government, which is of course supported by the World Bank and the IMF, is this, and companies like ADM, is this, continuation of this kind of wholesale destruction of one of the last remaining large rainforests on the planet. And if deforestation rates in Indonesia continue, 98% of the country's forests will be gone by 2022, which, it's sort of incomprehensible. All right. So as we're driving through the forest and the destroyed forest, we come across this camp, and we're on motorcycles, and we stop, and there's nobody there, but it's hard to see maybe, but underneath the tent there's a sleeping platform, and there's clothes, and there's a fire, and there's freshly cooked rice, and there's a little stream right there, and there's like toothbrushes and plates. And Momonus, actually Julian says to me, he says, they heard our motorcycles and they're hiding. I was like, oh God. So Momonus pulls back the bedding on the platform, and he writes, and he gets from the fire, a coal from the fire, and he writes, "Stop destroying the ancestral forest." These guys are tough. So we keep driving, and I don't know if these are the guys that live in that camp or not, but we come upon a chainsaw crew clearing trees. And these guys are not from the region, they're not from the villages around there, so they're brought in, and they're very uneducated, they're very poor. And we walked up to them, and I didn't know what was going to happen. We were driving and we couldn't pass through because the trees were blocking the way. And I thought, they're going to freak out. I've read these stories in National Geographic and whatever where, they can't, it's too scary because they're going to get shot if they go into the rainforest or whatever. And so, it was a little scary. But these guys were just it didn't matter that we were standing there. This guy in the middle just starts, firing up the chainsaw. And, they didn't, they were nonplussed that we were there. So the guys from the village that I'm with talk to these guys, and then Momonus takes off into the forest. And so we're standing there for 10 minutes, and my translator's hiding in the bushes and the trees. And that's just another image of the destruction. Anyway, so Momonus comes back 10 minutes later, and walking back, and he talks to the other guys from the village. There's 3 other guys from the village. And as they're talking, this other guy on a white motorcycle, rides out from where the clearing is going on. And he's obviously, better dressed than the guys who are doing the work. And he rides up, and he can't pass because the logs are blocking the road, but he rides up and he, gives us this really intense look, and Momonus is like, let's go. And we hop on the bikes and get the hell out of there. And basically about 20 minutes later we stop, and Momonus tells me what was happening, and it was the guy on the white motorcycle was the guy in the meeting the night before who said, I've been to the edge of the forest and nothing is happening. And he's Margareta's brother. Oh. So this is how it works. They go, the oil palm plantations go in, and they just pick apart, they pick off from these communities, these very tight-knit communities. And Julian told me that they offered him $6,000, which is a fortune, to them. They offered him $6,000 if he would put a crew together and start cutting trees down. And he said no. But in these villages, somebody inevitably says yes. And I talked to an anthropology PhD student who was living in another Dayak village. She'd been there for 2 months, like a year before, and was spending 6 months doing her field work then. And she'd been in this village for 4 months, and she had this ongoing relationship with the people in the village. And she said to me that they can't, she said, they can't imagine that the forest could be gone. Like, they can see this, and it still doesn't compute because the forest has been there always. And it just doesn't make sense that it would be permanently transformed, or, maybe not permanent, but I mean, eventually it'll grow back, but, hundreds of years from now. And that's part of how it works too, is that it's not conceivable. And after I got back to the US, I realized that we sort of operate the same way. We wake up every morning, the birds are chirping, the sun is out, there's still trees around, we have water, we can drink water from the tap, and we can't imagine that it would be gone. And yet we continue polluting, we continue allowing the leaders, the political leaders, the industry, the captains of industry, to carry on manufacturing things that pollute the atmosphere, that destroy the environment, that undermine biodiversity, and we also continue to a lot of people say, oh, this is so depressing, and the thing is, it's like, okay, do you want hope or do you want false hope? There's a difference. So, this is serious. It's not like, okay, well, you make mistakes and we can go back and fix it next time. It's not like that. And I think a big part of it is because it still remains so abstract. And part of why it still remains so abstract is that, there's all these commodities out there that tell us that we're fixing it. You buy the right things, and you're contributing to helping the planet. So just a couple. That's Momonus and Margareta with one of the many letters that they sent to the government. These are the chainsaws that they had captured the fall before I was there. They captured 11 chainsaws, and they had them hidden behind, underneath Julian's bed. And they were keeping them for leverage in negotiations. And what was clear to me was, there aren't going to be any negotiations. And it's really sad. And these people are incredibly courageous, but, there's not going to be any negotiations. How do these guys negotiate with a multi-billion-dollar transnational corporation? And I went to talk to the guy who's in charge of approving or rejecting the environmental impact assessments that nobody's doing, and he said to me, and he supposedly, according to the different activists, environmental groups I talked to, he's like their only hope. He's like the least corrupt political official in the western part of Borneo. And I went to talk to him, and I had just been to this village and a couple others, and he said to me, he said, everybody has to understand, the people in these villages have to understand that they have a say in what happens. And I'm like, yeah, they do. And he goes, everyone is an equal stakeholder. And I'm sitting in this thing interviewing him, and I'm like, I kind of lost it. And I was like, and I just said to him what I just said. I said to him what I just said to you. I was like, how in the hell are these people, they're not equal stakeholders to ADM? Like, that's preposterous. And he sort of kicked me out of his office. So this is just a map this is a different plantation. And I talked to people from this village, Maraulai. They're also Dayak, and this is from more kind of the central western part of Borneo. And so it's like the plantations get developed in these sections, and like this is the first section, and then they move like that. These two guys I talked to from Marauilai are brothers-in-law, and they basically what's happening is a plantation came in like 10 years ago and said we're going to do this, and they agreed to it. They thought, okay, it's bringing development. That's what the plantations always say. We're going to bring development. You're going to have stability. We're going to build schools and health clinics and all that stuff, which they don't do. They're just on the edge of this, these phases of development. But what it means is that the forest they depend on is being taken down. So it doesn't matter that like their village itself isn't being destroyed. Their livelihoods are being destroyed, and that's going to drive them from their villages into the cities where they will have the pleasure of living in slums. And so these guys told me that I met them at this place, PKS, but it's this Palm Oil Farmers Association, which was formed by a couple farmers to protect their interests. And they're individual palm oil farmers, and not necessarily, they're not, they don't work on the plantations, because some people do raise palm. It grows in that climate very well, even though it's not indigenous to Indonesia. Anyway, these two guys in Marauilai that I met were, this plantation had come in 10 years ago, and then it went bankrupt. They never, it was this family, and one brother got arrested for embezzling or whatever. Anyway, two of the brothers ended up in jail, and the sister didn't want to do it. So they sold it to another, a little bit of justice. But he was in jail for stealing money from somebody else, not for clearing the forest. So this other plantation bought it, didn't do anything for several years. In the meantime, these guys are watching what's happening to the other villages and the people that live in those villages when the palm oil companies come in. And they're like, wait a minute, we don't want to do this. And the new company says, well, you can't, you already agreed. You can't pull out of it now. And so they're resisting also, again, with the help of SPKS. And what is happening is one of the guys who was threatened by the military, that they said the military and the police protect these plantations. What I forgot to say was when Momonus and those guys seized those 11 chainsaws, the military was there protecting the chainsaw crew, and this is fairly common. Anyway, so the military threatened to kill this guy from Marauilai, and the police have also threatened him. And what's happening is a sort of systemic harassment of the people in the village. And his brother-in-law showed me a letter that he'd gotten from the police calling him in, essentially sort of arresting him for stealing, for damaging the palm oil plantation that's already set up, because he took some of the fallen fruit, which has a seed in it, before the current company bought it, and he planted those. And so they said, you stole, it's like stolen property, and you damaged this oil palm plantation. And so he's kind of, he was going to a hearing, and they called his brother-in-law to testify against him. And this is the type of thing, it's just this ongoing harassment by the oil palm companies, sort of breaking apart the communities, by the local officials, welcoming the plantations in without consenting, without the villagers' consent, and then the state, the police and the military harassing them and defending the plantations. This guy works for Wilmar. This is just another plantation where, so there's different terrain. This is a more hilly area, which is not a good place to plant oil palm trees, but they're doing it anyway. So what they do is they come in, they clear the forest. I'll just show you, this illustrates it better. They clear the forest, they plant the oil palms, those are baby oil palm trees, And when the land, when the soil is exhausted, they just move on. And they pay hardly anything for the land, so it's economically totally rational. It's totally rational to clear the rainforest. And when I was there, after spending like a month there, I was kind of like, yeah, I got it. They don't have industry. They have plantations. That's how you make money. So I just want to talk briefly about the certification, this whole idea of certifying, third-party certification. We see it with organic food. We see it with, forest certified, sustainably harvested wood. We see it with, what's that? Fair trade, exactly. So, as you guys know, these kinds of operations are basically set up to kind of sort of manage the disaster after it's already happened. And in some cases they do intervene and maybe make the situation less destructive. But basically, so in the palm oil sector, there's what's called the Roundtable on Sustainable Palm Oil. And this is an industry-formed group, started in the early 2000s, and it was started by, so palm oil is also used mostly for food. It's when you buy vegetable oil in a bottle in the supermarket, it's palm oil, like 9 times out of 10. In processed foods, it's very common. So the Roundtable on Sustainable Palm Oil was started in part because there was so much pressure on food processors in Europe to not use this because of the rainforest destruction. Pressure from Friends of the Earth, from the Forest Peoples Program, from other organizations, and Greenpeace. And so they formed the Roundtable on Sustainable Palm Oil with the World Wildlife Fund, which kind of facilitated it, and got together these corporations like Unilever, Cadbury, Schweppes, and also the oil palm for biodiesel people started getting, hopping on board as biofuels grew under environmental protection and CO2 reduction mandates in Europe and mandates in the U.S. also. So you have these targets, these like binding targets, which means that you have to rely on biofuels. And the options we have for biofuels right now are like this or ethanol. These are the options that exist. And second generation biofuels, according to Stephen Chu, the Secretary of Energy, are who forged this deal with BP at UC Berkeley. And the University of Illinois Champaign-Urbana, they have also, that's part of the deal. According to Stephen Chu, we're like at least a decade away from second generation biofuels. So in the meantime, this is what we're going to rely on. And these targets aren't going away. They're not going away under Obama. They're not going away in the UK and in Europe. So these certification bodies are increasingly important to managing the fallout from this kind of environmental activity. So Wilmar is a member of the Roundtable on Sustainable Palm Oil. Duda Palma is a member. And other big palm oil, Cargill is a member. Okay. And so, they're not exactly like objective outsiders, but they get to say it's third-party certified because it's the RSPO, right? So I just want to read this, and the reason I show you this guy's picture is because I went there and he's like a low-level manager, and the main manager wasn't there when we just stopped by, and so I got him to talk. And he said there's this investigation that was happening, not so much an investigation, but sort of, a very non-binding checking in on Wilmar that was happening at that point, because they receive money, they've received tens of millions of dollars from the World Bank for their operations. And the International Finance Corporation, which issues the loans and the money, has certain criteria of social and environmental responsibilities that their recipients they say their recipients follow. And environmental and social justice organizations on Borneo did these amazing studies. And one of the groups is Lembaga Gemawan, which is this totally amazing organization. And they went in and they just documented all of this stuff that was going on, people being forcibly driven from their land, the clear cutting and burning without, illegal burning, and also without environmental impact assessments and proper permits. And so the IFC was, looking into it, and so was the RSPO. And since then, the RSPO has decided that Wilmar is actually an example of how you should do it right. They told me that a couple months ago. It's fascinating. So I'm just going to read from the RSPO their policies and criteria for responsible palm oil production. So this is criterion 7.5. No new plantings are established on local people's land without their free, prior, and informed consent. Dealt with through a documented system that enables indigenous peoples, local communities, and other stakeholders to express their views through their own representative institutions. And that's one of many, obviously completely empty, pledges that they make. So anyway, so this guy, so during this investigation, as the RSPO brings in somebody to make sure that they're not deforesting conservation value forests, which they weren't, they were like, we found that we weren't doing that. And so this guy tells me it was during this time when there was this certification going on, so they had to stop. Wilmar temporarily stopped expanding their plantations, and he said to me, we have it all planned. We're just waiting to get the go-ahead. We have it all surveyed. We have all of our saplings. We're totally ready to go. And I said, well, are you going to get the go-ahead? And he was like, of course. So, there isn't really time to go into it, but this is another village. This is a peasant community. A Muslim peasant community. They're internal migrants that were relocated by the government. And they live along this river, which they rely on to bathe, wash their clothes. They don't drink the water. They catch rainwater. And this is just another ecosystem. There's another picture from the village. I met with these guys, and a lot of them work on another plantation that Wilmar owns directly. And some of them, they all had land. There's this whole system when you have land that the palm oil plantations come in and they make a deal with you. Say you have 10 acres. They say, okay, we'll take your 10 acres, or say you have 12 acres. They take 10 of your acres and you can keep 2 for growing some food crops. And they give you 5 acres back, planted with palms. And then they get to keep the rest. But the idea is that they plant it with palms, so it's you get this deal. And the way it works is the Wilmar, it's like sharecropping. They have to sell their produce to Wilmar because there's no one else to sell it to. The price is established by Wilmar, working with some government officials and supposedly with a representative of the farmers. But none of these guys knew anyone who was a representative. And I asked them, there's this whole system where they don't get directly paid by the mill. The money goes to Wilmar. Half of what they earn is taken out directly from their earnings to pay off the loan for the palm oil trees. So it's this complete bait and switch. And then they And then also deducted from their earnings by Wilmar is fees for security, for road maintenance, for administrative costs, for fertilizer, for this endless list of things, and a mandatory savings account. So I asked these guys, how much do you earn from your crops? They don't know how much they earn. They don't know how much of their loans they've paid off, and they don't know how much is in their savings accounts. And when I asked them, there was just like, it was clear that they, who's in charge. Supposedly there's this body that sort of interacts with Wilmar on their behalf. Well, who's in that body? Who leads that body? We don't know. And then I asked Wilmar, I talked to an executive, the guy in charge of all their operations in this part of Borneo, and he was like, no, the farmers decide who, And also, incidentally, this guy, Anki Chow is his name, we were talking about, it was really amazing. I had this translator, this American woman, I'm gonna wrap it up really soon. I had this American translator who's been living in Indonesia for like 30 years, and she spoke English, and I met her, and I needed a translator right away, and so she agreed to do it, and it turned out that he spoke English. And but she lives in Pontianak, in the main town, which is where their headquarters is, in a big, like a mansion without any signs, and with like a really intense security system, so you would never know, and I had to like talk to 5 different people to figure out where their headquarters was. And anyway, so this woman goes with me, and we're sitting in there, and at first he's very aggressive, and he's like, which environmental group are you with? And just tell me, and he's like, I know you people. And Michelle, my translator, she's like, I've seen you before. And like they sort of knew people in common, because she teaches English to the wealthy people in Pontianak, and to their children. And he's like, yeah, and so they sort of start chatting, and I was kind of annoyed. And then it turns out that he's like, these people, they like block the roads, and they have protests, and they're, he's from Malaysia. He's like, in Malaysia, you just take the land, and they don't have any choice, and you just push them off. And then there's some kind of like accountability in Indonesia, because they recognize some ancestral rights, and they do this relocation through the government, and so they do recognize some of the peasants' land rights. So there's at least a little bit of room. And he's like, it like gets in the way of business, it lowers our profits. And Michelle was like, yeah, that's awful, which she actually thought it was awful. And I was just like, what's going on here? And then he just started talking, and it was totally great. And so he says, and he took us to lunch, and then he took us out to the plantation, and I talked to these guys the day before, and then he took me to the same plantation because he was so proud of it. And but he said, when we get our permits, a guy comes to the office, you pay him, and that's it. That's how it works. And I wrote a story that was in the March-April issue of Mother Jones, and we got back in touch with him during the fact-checking, and he was like, I didn't say that, of course. And then he suddenly didn't work at the company anymore. And I have a picture of me with him. He was like, I never met her. And I have a picture of us together. It was so awesome. So this is the entrance to the palm oil plantation, and those are just some of the palm oil trees. So just quickly, this is the sort of third type of, or actually there's more than that, but this is another type of ecosystem that exists on Borneo, and it's basically peatland forest, and it used to be mangrove. And when Wilmar came in to this plantation in 1996, they clear cut the place, and because it's peat, you have to cut channels into it and drain the water out of it so that you can grow in it, and you have to douse it with chemicals. Anki Chow told me they spend 65% of their costs, it goes to fertilizer and other chemicals in his region. So the peatlands, when you drain it, it releases massive amounts of CO2. I mean, it's basically like a storehouse of rotting plant material. And then another thing that happens is that underground fires start, and you can't put them out. And that releases even more CO2. So just one more statistic, which is pretty staggering. And I think this is according to Greenpeace, but the destruction and degradation of Indonesia's peatland, just Indonesia's, accounts for 4% of all global CO2 emissions. I mean, it's just like, actually it's 4% of total greenhouse gas emissions. So it's, you know, this kind of thing, you know, I mean, you know, you look at it, you have no idea. Something, you know, it's just incredibly impactful. And we're doing this under the name of saving the planet, you know? And another thing about what's happening on Borneo is that it's the last sustainable, realistic habitat for the orangutan. And I mean, it's the last place they can live. There's still patches on Sumatra where there's forests where they can live, but it's going, you know, and they can't survive in that confined space. And as Borneo is destroyed, that's it. Like, goodbye to the orangutans. And so I just want to point out, see how the trees are sagging? That's just an indication of how inappropriate the soil is to grow these trees on. It can't even hold the trees upright. And I just want to show you quickly, this is Walhy's headquarters, and that's inside the office. The guy at the board is Saban Setiawan, and he's the head of this branch of Walhy. And these were my guides into the forest. Ari and Ladup. Ladup was the driver. He was totally amazing because these roads are just crazy. And it was like pouring down rain a lot of the time. And he would be text messaging while he was driving. And I was just like mortified. And then I realized that was like part of his style of driving. And he was really good. So I just, I let him do his thing. But anyway, so that's it. Thanks.